Hey guys, Spud here, and in this DCS F4U-1D Corsair tutorial, we'll be going over how to land the ensign eliminator safely and repeatably on the soft and short fields of the DCS World War II Mariana Islands map. In this tutorial video, like all of my tutorials, it was recorded live while I'm doing the voiceover, and in this video, my approach speed was a little too high. However, we go over how to account for this and adjust our technique to ensure a safe landing every time, despite the mistake. And the key in tail draggers is if you're going to make an error, make sure that you err on the side of too high and too fast, as opposed to too low and too slow. So let's jump in and get started. When it comes to landing the DCS F4U-1D Corsair, everything we talked about in my previous video on the basics of landing warbirds and tail draggers in DCS completely applies. So make sure you go back and watch that video first, as this one's going to build on a lot of those skills here. And unfortunately for us, the World War II Marianas map is definitely conspiring to make our landing today much more challenging and much more hazardous. But thankfully, because the Corsair is a navalized fighter, she definitely has a couple of tricks up her sleeve to help us out when it comes to making a safe and repeatable landing here on the Marianas map. Now, taking a look at the airfield we're going to land at, it is called a Ghana airfield, and it is in the middle of Guam, and it's my favorite airfield on the World War II Marianas map because it really is just so emblematic and reminds me so much of just the stereotypical airfield buried deep within the jungle on a far-flung island across the vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean. And that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love it. But unfortunately for us, most of the airfields here on the Mariana Islands map are made of crushed coral and gravel, and so they have a very soft surface, which means that we are going to have to touch down on the runway itself with as little vertical speed as possible, as little forward airspeed as possible, and we're going to definitely need to make a 3-point landing to ensure that we don't have our main wheels dig into the surface of the runway and tip us forward and strike our prop, or even flip us over and kill us beneath the fuselage of our aircraft. It's also very challenging because unlike the nice long concrete 10,000 foot runway we were practicing on in the last video, this airfield is only about 0.7 nautical miles long, which makes it out to be about 5,000 feet or so long, which makes it a much more challenging airfield to land on with the tail dragger. Now, the way we're going to counteract that and make a more of a spot landing today is we're going to shift our aim point from our aim point being at the threshold of the runway. Our aim point for today is going to be further out into the grass before the runway threshold. And if we aim to land here, that means that we're actually going to probably touch down somewhere near the runway threshold here. And just like we talked about in my last video, I prefer to come in a little bit high and a little bit fast for the stated numbers that are actually in the book for the various tail dragger aircraft that I fly. I find this gives me some extra control and some extra finesse to get the aircraft down in a safe and repeatable manner. So my preferred pattern altitude for warbirds and tail draggers in general is going to be about 1,500 feet or so. And we can see here the field elevation of a Ghana airfield on Guam is about 260 feet. So we'll take that 1,500, we'll add 260 to it, and that's going to give us a pattern altitude today of about 1,750 or so. And so that's what we'll be shooting for, and I'm probably going to try to keep my approach speed somewhere around 100 knots to give me a little bit more control authority and a little bit more ability to finesse the landing in our Corsair. And of course, we're going to be going for that 3-point landing attitude because of the soft nature of this airfield. So coming back to the cockpit here, we're going to go ahead and start to set our landing power settings here in the aircraft, which is going to be an RPM of roughly about 2400 RPM on our prop lever, and we're going to pull the power back to about 30 inches of manifold pressure. And if we keep her right around there, that's going to really help us get down to our approach speed of between about 90 and 100 knots, as well as allow us to bleed off some airspeed in the brake turn. Now, as we talked about in the last video, we make the brake turn in a warbird not necessarily to bleed off a ton of airspeed, like we do in a fighter jet in DCS, but more to set us up for a nice constant rate turn all the way down to touchdown, so we can keep the runway in sight without it disappearing behind the big old nose of our tail dragger or warbird. Also, something to note here is the airfields on the Mariana Islands map and across the Western Pacific in real life, for the most part, were uncontrolled. So make sure that when you set up for your overhead pattern at these airfields, you're flying slightly offset to the right or the left-hand side of the runway, so that way you can look on down and see that the runway and taxiways are clear. So that way you're not going to be landing on top of anybody, and there's not going to be anybody who's going to take off into you as you're on the landing rollout. Okay. So we're coming through about 210 knots or so. That will work out for us perfectly, as we'll bleed that off in our brake turn. And it looks like I'm a bit high above the pattern altitude I wanted to be at, but like I said, I'd rather be high than low, and I'd rather be fast than slow in an airplane like the Corsair. And looking on down there, it looks like the runway and the taxiways leading up to the runway are definitely clear, so I think we're good to go. We're at our good 1750 pattern altitude, and because this runway is so short, I'm going to brake at the very end of it, and here we go. And I'll go ahead and open up the controls indicator there so you guys can see what I'm doing on the controls. I'm going to pull the power back to idle. I'm going to widen out my turn here. We'll get the gear down and the flaps down. Now, being able to bring the flaps down all the way to 50 degrees is what really gives us the secret sauce of allowing us to land in a very short distance here in the F4U Corsair. And we're getting down to our landing speed. I'm just going to add a little bit of power back, as we always want to land a big heavy tail dragger warbird with power on. We don't want to touch down with zero power at idle airspeed. So now let's take a look at our aim point. So our aim point is going to be somewhere in this neighborhood here. So we're going to aim to land right here and round out over the runway right here. And that's going to allow us to float and finesse the aircraft onto the ground over here, closer to the threshold of the runway. It's also going to allow us to bleed off more airspeed to get the aircraft into the 3-point attitude for our touchdown, and allow us to finesse the aircraft as much as possible to land with as little vertical speed as possible, which is absolutely key for a very soft airfield like we've got here, to avoid those main wheels digging in and tipping us up into a prop strike or flipping us over and crushing us. So let's go ahead and continue on here. Little on the fast side, we'll bring the power down to idle. And I'm definitely still fast, but if you end up fast and we're up at 120 knots instead of being down at about 100 knots where we wanted to be, what we'll do is, instead of having our aim point here, we'll extend our aim point out a little bit to give us a little extra time to float a little longer above the runway and finesse that airspeed down. So we'll descend a little bit quicker here over our aim point. We're going to round out, and we're just now going to finesse the aircraft on down. Probably pulled a little bit hard on my round out there, and that's why we kind of climbed up a little more than I would have wanted to. And we're just kind of keeping her off the runway, and boom, right down into the 3-point attitude. And we're then going to pin the tail down and, of course, track the center line. We're going to push the prop lever all the way forward to get maximum RPM to flatten out that prop and help us slow down as quickly as possible. Once we flatten out that prop, our prop is going to act more like a giant speed brake at the front of our aircraft than a thrust creation device, especially at idle power. Alright, and we're down to taxi speed, so we should be ready to go. We'll go ahead and find a taxiway, and we'll just get right back to our tail dragger fundamentals for our taxi. Make sure that our tail wheel is unlocked, and we'll just taxi right on off the runway there. So unfortunately for that landing here, I was a little bit fast, and I floated down the runway a little bit more than I would have wanted to, but the way that we kind of counteracted being a little bit faster than we would have wanted to be is to shift that aim point further from the threshold of the runway. And honestly, being a little bit faster like that on a very soft field like we have here is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, because it's going to allow us to finesse the aircraft down onto the runway, you know, as gently as possible and with as little vertical speed as possible, which is always, always, always a very good thing when landing on a soft and unimproved runway. Because the worst thing that could possibly happen to us here is our main wheels dig right into that soft runway surface, whether that be the crushed coral or gravel or grass, and then of course tip us right up onto our prop and even flip us over. So hopefully this was instructive for you guys and helped you guys out. Of course, when it comes to landing on an aircraft carrier, that is a whole other kind of bag of worms, so we'll tackle that in a separate tutorial video. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video helps you out with landing the Corsair, and enjoy this beautiful game, and we'll see you in the next one. Please give a like and a subscribe. See you guys.